Russian President Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine entered its 14th week. We are approaching day 100 tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. Fierce battles continue in the east of Ukraine, where Russian forces are now concentrating their attack. The apparent aim is to conquer all of the Luhansk Oblast, relying on very heavy artillery bombardments. We'll be hearing more on that in a moment. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz last Saturday in a joint telephone call once more spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin, this time to push Putin to enable to export Ukrainian grains. In turn, Putin demanded the lifting of relevant sanctions for Russia to increase its supply of fertilizers and agricultural products to world markets, feeding into the Kremlin's propaganda line that Western sanctions, rather than the war of aggression, are to be blamed for global shortages. The EU on Monday, at a special meeting, summit meeting in Brussels, managed to finally sign off on a sixth sanction package, or maybe it didn't, because Hungary late yesterday evening once again sort of stopped the process by adding more demands, this time referring to sanctions against the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. And at the moment, again, we are in limbo. But if the sixth sanction package would be approved, it would contain a Russian oil embargo, which targets at least 90% of Russian oil exports to the EU. This is referring to tanker oil, not pipeline oil, which is excluded for the moment. And potentially very significantly, there's also an EU-UK agreement to block Western insurance for tankers transporting Russian oil, which is likely to impair Russian attempts to redirect their exports. The European Council on Monday also addressed the food security situation, condemning, and I quote, the destruction and illegal appropriation by Russia of agricultural production in Ukraine. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine is having a direct impact on global food security and affordability. The European Council calls on Russia to end its attacks on transport infrastructure in Ukraine, to lift the blockade of Ukrainian Black Sea ports, and to allow food exports, in particular from Odessa. And now, without any further ado, let's turn to András for his assessment.
Thank you, Henning. Good morning once again. Thank you for joining us today morning. As usual, please allow me to share a map. As usual, we are going to use the maps of the Institute for the Study of War. As during the previous week or weeks, we have intense fighting going on in the east of Ukraine as well as in the northwestern part of the Kherson region. Let's go a bit closer to the main front line. This is the this is the Donbas salient. As you know it very well, Russian forces are advancing on Severodonetsk. According to the local Ukrainian administration, they are controlling already more than 70% of the city. Ukrainian forces are retreating from Severodonetsk to the other side of the river, to the city of Lysychansk. However, it is also quite likely that once Severodonetsk falls, Russians will speed up their attempt from the Popasna region to the north in order to encircle Lysychansk from the south without having to cross the river here. So all in all, it is quite likely that the twin city of Severodonetsk, Lysychansk are going to fall in relatively short time from now. Important thing here. I think we need to be aware of the Russian efforts which try to picture and make us perceive the battle for Severodonetsk as something decisive. Dear colleagues, it is not Stalingrad. It is not Moscow, it is Severodonetsk. It's a small countryside Ukrainian city. Same with Lysychansk. So the overall importance of this city stems from the fact that Russia tries to make us believe that this is important. In the strategic sense, even if Ukraine loses control over Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, which it will, this doesn't alter the strategic balance. It's not Mariupol, it's not Kiev, it's not Kharkiv. So this is the battle for Severodonetsk is actually, in my opinion, kind of a symbol how much the Russian military efforts have been downgraded in the last 99 days of the war. So yes, Ukraine is likely to lose Severodonetsk, likely to lose Lysychansk, and Russians are trying to continue their efforts to encircle the Donbas salient. However, at this moment, it is not yet sure whether Ukrainian armed forces left here in the edge of in the top of the salient could be encircled by the Russians, or whether they will be able to evacuate westwards. We will see. Here, Russia is also pushing the Izium direction. However, some good news here. The Ukrainian counterattack in the Kharkiv region has resumed. Here, we need to look at the blue territories. Once if Ukrainian forces are able to continue this counterattack, they might well be able to endanger the Russian ground lines of communication of the Izium offensive. So this Ukrainian counterattack is again on the move, and hopefully will slow down the Russian attack on Izium and the Russian push south from Izium, which is important in order to allow the Ukrainian forces retreat from the eastern tip of the salient. What's happening on the other front lines, and I'm approaching the end of my 7 minutes. We also need to watch the Kherson region, particularly the northwestern parts of Kherson region, when Ukrainian armed forces are launching or continuing counterattacks. Here, Russian defenses do not seem to be as convincing as many would assume. So these Ukrainian counterattacks seem to have some momentum. We will see how far they are able to go. Anyways, geography kind of favors the Ukrainians here, because on the Dnipro River here, when I'm pointing with the mouse, on the Dnipro River, in this whole section, there are altogether 3 bridges. All the 3 relatively down south here at Kherson. So the Russian forces fighting in this territory have quite complicated logistical lines. This favors the Ukrainians. We see how this counteroffensive goes. Just my last remark here, to go back to the overall map. Russian forces available are very, very limited. So apparently they are unable to conduct offensive operations on all sections, even of the shortened front line at the same time. And we know that Russia is still struggling with resupplying the lost manpower. Good news here, Russia is apparently not going for any kind of compulsory mobilization. Neither partial mobilization nor full mobilization. Most probably, the Kremlin intends to avoid any kind of compulsory element, because a compulsory mobilization would bring the war right to the door of the Russian citizens. So instead, the Kremlin is trying to mobilize fresh soldiers who freshly left the armed forces. They raise the age limit of contracted service. They are bringing back forces from Syria and South Ossetia. They are forcefully mobilizing population of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, but they are doing everything to avoid any kind of compulsory mobilization within Russia. And this is hopeful indicator that the Russian society would react very badly to any kind of compulsory mobilization, meaning any kind of transformation of the special military operation to an officially declared war. So this is where we stand at the moment. The places to watch, of course, are the Donbas salient, the Ukrainian counterattack at Kharkiv, and the developments here in the northwest part of the Kherson region. That's it for my 7 minutes. Thank you for the attention. Henning, I give you the floor back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, András. Since Stefan has to leave us a little early, let's move on to him straight away, and maybe then we can, after his presentation, we can have 3 quick questions from the audience, if there are any. Stefan, please.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I would have a question to András. Maybe you can pick it up later, because I think the question for me is what they can do with these troops. So what they are able to do in Ukraine beside Donbas, what they are focusing at the moment. I think that would be for me a crucial question if they don't do mobilization, but maybe that's later for the discussion. I think that's an important question. So I just want to look into sanctions and the whole discussion about sanctions. I think we just have at the moment the discussion about the 6th package. It's about the oil sanctions. And I think the difficulties also to agree on oil sanctions and Hungary's role here, but it's not only Hungary who wants to have exceptions, show that we have reached a limit also in terms of sanctions. So I think there's a kind of a peak. And I would even say gas sanctions are off the table at the moment. I think it's too costly. because it will slow down the global economic growth. A recession with a growing energy and petrol prices will come, and that will further decline and also the sanctions, or will further decline the support for the sanctions. And I would say the formula, the more is better. I think that seems to be, for me at the moment, the formula. Yeah, so maximalist approach towards sanctions is maybe not the right formula, and that is because of several reasons. I think first, the costs for the EU side are really growing. It will now really start to hurt also our economy, and we don't talk about other countries of the world, yeah, which are impacted also by this war, and therefore I think the political and the societal support is declining, and we reach already a peak. I think we have already different discussions than we have had a couple of weeks ago, and this will even grow with the growing costs for the sanctions. Second, the Russian leadership is willing to pay a high price because it wants to bring Ukraine under control. So it has a complete different cost-benefit calculation than we have. And there is a strong pressure also on the elite and society to accept sanctions inside of Russia, and no critical opinion anymore. And even if some people will not like it, I don't see at the moment that this policy is really seriously challenged in Russia. So I think this is a long-term game. Third, it is very difficult to isolate a big country like Russia. It's not Iran. It is relevant in some resources for the world market. Outside of the Western countries and its allies, there's no such a support for these sanctions. And there's also a different interpretation of the war. So I think we are really in a Western bubble. Yeah, we are discussing also this war. If you look to India, China, Brazil, but also African countries, I think you have a very different perception also, and not a willingness to pay such high prices also for sanctions. Russia will have an expected income of 14 billion euro more this year, only because of export and oil and gas. It really benefits from the higher prices also for resources. So you can see that at the moment, the impact on the economy is rather limited. It will grow, especially in autumn. Russians will really feel it, and that might have an impact. But after the first shock moment with the war, with the devaluation of the ruble, crash at the Russian stock exchange, we could observe a kind of a normalization. And even if many international companies have left Russia, many others stay. So there's a shortage of some products, but it's not so visible for the people. And the question is what will happen in autumn, and when the economy is running down. But I'm rather skeptical that this will really change fundamentally Russian politics. And the pressure will not be strong enough. So we will have about 10% of the GDP. A drop of 10% of the GDP, which is expected for this year for Russia. But a lot of depends on sanctions, on prices for oil, and also if Russia can further export its resources. I think the main impact I see for Russia is the dependency on Western technology. Nearly every Russian product has Western components. And that means that really the production in many areas, also in the military industrial complex, will have shortages. And that has a middle term and long term effect. What we also can see, I talked with some Russian colleagues inside of Russia, that they try to create a new infrastructure to import these technical equipments via Central Asian countries. So that will be more costly, it will have limits. But they are building up these schemes already to circumvent somehow the sanctions. So it's also a question, where are the holes? And if we can attack also these holes, not that there's a kind of an adaptation. I think the question are here, if it's possible also to completely isolate Russia, and does it make sense? Yeah, also with regard to sanctions. I think if a country is so relevant for the global market on key resources, which includes also grain and fertilizer, there will be a huge effect of sanctions on the world economy. At the same time, the cut of Russian banks from SWIFT does not mean that these banks cannot use other transfer systems or have bilateral trade with banks of other countries without SWIFT. So I think the trade the financial trade is still going on. And if we're looking to China, I think the lessons learned are that these kind of economic wars will lead to a further acceleration to be more independent from Western technology, but also to build up alternative financial instruments. I think that's also something in India and in other countries which is discussed. And the more the US and the EU use their economic and financial power with sanctions, the more other countries will have an interest to create alternative systems, financial systems also to this Western-dominated system. I think that will not happen soon, but if countries start to build up alternative systems and big countries like China and India use them, there will be a growing split in the global financial market. And I think also in the tech sector, it is a question if it's in our interest to cut off Russia from any Western technology, that they can only use, for instance, Chinese technology, because they would decouple and it will give Western countries less information and less impact also on Russia. Yeah, so it's the same with the financial system and with the technology. So this is not a statement for no sanctions, but sanctions can be only one instrument beside others. Many effects of large-scale sanctions are very unclear. We have a lot of side effects, including for countries which are far away, and sanctioned countries somehow adapt also on a different level to this new situation. In long term, it can build up economic pressure on the regime, but in authoritarian states, that means often that security actors will have more access to resources and will increase their impact. And since we understand that this war can go long and the conflict with Russia will not stop soon, it is crucial that we only agree on sanctions which we can live for a long time. Yeah, so I think I just wanted to explain the complexity also of sanctions and also the problem of side effects, and that they are often not lead to an immediate reaction from the sanction state.
Let's take a very short break for questions, if there are any. András has already started to address one in the chat, which was the question there was to in how far the weapons which have been promised by the US, but also by other sort of supporters of Ukraine, what kind of difference they will be making. There's also the question, which also refers to András, whether there's a possibility of Russian forces to withdraw behind the Dnieper River. And there was Stefan's question to András about sort of what kind of what can be achieved with the Russian forces in the area, and what kind of war we can sort of consequently expect. Maybe, is there another question for Stefan, because he is to leave soon, given us sort of after the military situation didn't look that bad. You know, sort of the sanctions situation isn't looking good. So that's not the case. So maybe András, if you want to pick the three questions, and then we continue with Dr. Götz.
Thank you. In order to save time, I will answer the question of Mr. Jörn Eichhorn in the chat about the Kherson region, and instead try to answer here the question of Stefan. So what could these variously mobilized Russian troops be used in Ukraine? Well, right now the Russian mobilization is running on a voluntary basis and on an individual basis. Meaning, even if some soldiers who recently left the army come back to serve, these people receive individual training but are not really trained together as units. And in order to be an efficient combat unit, you need to train together with your comrades. So individual training, individual mobilized reservists have very limited value. So right now, this kind of hidden mobilization, what Russia is doing, this kind of voluntary mobilization, I don't expect that this hidden mobilization would create any kind of troops that would be of high combat value. Instead, it's more second line forces, more for occupational duties and more for manning defensive lines. And Russia is clearly constructing defensive lines in the northern parts of the Zaporizhzhia region, they are facing increasing problems from Ukrainian partisans, even in the Luhansk region. That's very important. In the Luhansk region, close to the Russian border, there is substantial partisan movement. And in the Kherson region, they are suffering a lot from Ukrainian partisans attacking separatist officials, attacking infrastructure, and generally being very, very active. I mean, this strong partisan movement is probably one of the reasons why the referendum in Kherson has been delayed to next year. Because organizing a referendum, I mean, imagine organizing a voting district. You need to have officials in the voting district. You need to have people who count the votes and everything. When partisans are hunting down collaborators, this is extremely dangerous. So most probably one of the reasons why Kherson separatist authorities decided to delay the referendum is that they cannot handle the partisan movement yet. So the newly arriving, the forces yet to arrive from Russia, I think they are probably going to use for like second line echelon and for occupational duties, combating partisans and things like this. If deployed to the front line, they would suffer very high losses because their combat readiness and level of training is generally very low. I hope this goes for answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now let's move on to Dr. Götz for her input.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to join this session. I'm very pleased to comment on the situation regarding Ukraine's agricultural exports. So since the beginning of the Ukraine war, ports are closed in Ukraine. So basically the agricultural export has stopped. And in general, it's the port of Odessa, the largest port, which is of primary importance regarding Ukraine's agricultural exports. In addition, also the ports of Mykolaiv and Cherson, whereas the smaller ports in the Azov Sea, which are also closed, are also only play a smaller role. Now, we have learned from the media and other sources that the current leftovers, the storages in Ukraine are filled with between 20 to 25 million tons of cereals. So what does this mean? 20 million tons is in Panamax vessels. So a Panamax vessel can carry 60,000 tons of cereals. So 20 million tons is 320 Panamax vessels. And in trucks, one truck can carry 40 tons. So 20 million tons is 500,000 trucks. Now the storage facilities need to become empty for the coming new harvest. However, the ports cannot be used. So the EU has really shown intensive efforts to make this possible and to enable the agricultural exports, and also the European railway lines. They have tried a lot to establish alternative export possibilities. Currently, the problem, or the main problem with the train export, is that the track gauge of the Ukrainian railway is not compatible with the railway in the EU. So meaning at the border, all the trains need to be reloaded. And that, of course, takes a lot of time. And yeah, the operation times have been increased at the border. The requirements regarding certificates have been facilitated. The personnel have been increased. And new routes have been established, in particular routes to the port of Constanța in Romania, also ports in Bulgaria, where the grain is transported by train, and there it's put into storage facilities. And particularly the port of Constanța allows to reload the grain in the Panamax vessels. And these are the large vessels which also are able to reach the very far away destinations, for example, in Africa, in North Africa and in Sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Asia. It's easy to imagine that the transport costs, of course, increase. It takes a lot of time. However, the alternative export capacities have been increased, and the aim is now, or it's forecasted, that for June and July, Ukraine will be able to export between 2 to 3 million tons of agricultural exports. Just for comparison, in April, it have been 1.2 million tons. In May, it's between 1 and 1.5 million tons. So this is quite some improvement. In general, it should be pointed out that this marketing year, Ukraine had a record harvest. So the agricultural exports really were higher than the previous year. And it's until the end of May, like almost 47 million tons of grains and soybeans have been exported. So this is about 5 million tons more compared to last year. However, due to the closed ports, of course, this will slow down. And in the end, it's expected that until the end of June, so in July, the new harvest year starts, the size of exports will be about the size we have seen last year. Now what does this mean for food security, that the ports are closed and that the export capacities are much smaller? So if we talk about 2 to 3 tons, it needs to be pointed out that usually Ukraine exports in this time period about 6 million tons per month. So it's about 1/3. Now, what does that mean for global markets? First, currently, it needs to be pointed out that these effects are already reflected in world market prices. So if that situation remains until the end of June, basically, I do not expect further effects. Prices have been above 400 euro per ton of wheat for a couple of weeks now. And given that the talks with Russia now regarding opening a kind of humanitarian corridor have intensified, in the last few days, the price has come down again below 400 euro per ton for wheat. So this is quite a positive sign. If indeed that corridor will be established, we will see that the price will further drop and go down. However, the situation, if it lasts or it will continue like this, if ports remain closed, starting next harvest season in July, that might, or the risk is very high that it will significantly affect the food security situation in the upcoming year. The reason is that if the storage facilities cannot be emptied, it's not available to store the grain of the new harvest. So you can only then export directly, so via trains, up to 3 million tons per month. And then the more the time continues, the question is, how does it look like with storages? I mean, the old harvest, the grains over time become rotten. So they, at some point of time, you cannot use that grain anymore. So there is really significantly a risk. What will happen, and in particular will depend on the size of the production, the harvest, and the exports of all the other large grain exporters. And that, in the end, will, of course, depend on the climate, on the weather. So there's quite some insecurity what will happen in the next year. Let me, in the end, just add 2 sentences regarding Russia. Russia is different to Ukraine. Russia has only closed its ports for a few to 3 weeks. And since then, Russia is exporting grains. However, the Russian wheat exports are quite restricted by export restrictions by the Russian government. There's a floating export tax. There's an export ban towards the other EA-EU countries. In general, Russia only exports wheat and grain to the so-called friendly countries. And for example, Germany or the EU, they basically do not import any substantial amounts of agricultural products from Russia. In general, if Russia might stop its grain exports in fall, which is already discussed in the media, what will happen? The USDA so far forecasts that Russia will export next year 39 million tons of wheat. If that happens, Russia will be again the largest wheat exporter in the world. However, if Russia might use its position on the world market and might, for example, thinkable could be for some weeks restrict its wheat exports, this will affect markets for sure. And that, of course, will have price effects because this option is not yet foreseen by the market. So that would mean in fall, we would see further unexpected price increases. Yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. That's very interesting. Maybe sort of before we jump to the Q&A, one more question. Sort of, I take from your presentation that you think for now the situation isn't as risky as I don't know. I have the Economist here, sort of the cover before. But no one can see this. Sorry, it sounded very dramatic. But you think it is not yet that dramatic if we can expect sort of that more Ukrainian grains get into the world market, at least at this reduced volume?
Yeah, for now until the end of June, I think we will see no further effect. So if the situation remains like currently, the ports are closed, Ukraine exports up to 2 to 3 million tons. This is already reflected by the market. Nothing will change, our prices will remain, but with the new harvest starting in July, there might be consequences, and particularly the more the year continues, because the question is really if storages cannot be emptied, and I don't know how it would work, how they would put then the old grains, if they can dispose it somewhere. So the more difficult it becomes. Yeah, think of November, December, January, because in that time period, you can only sell from this what is in a storage facility, in a silo. Whereas in July, August, September, there might be some grains you can sell directly from the field.
Thank you very much. This is sort of the moment where we would like to open it to our audience as well. Raise your hands in particular, and while we wait for you to think about your questions, maybe one question to András, because it's a military question. There's in the chat, Vitaly.
Yes, dear colleagues, I'm here. Can I ask this question?
Yes, fine. Please go ahead.
Dear colleagues, greeting from Ukraine. Thank you for this event. It's very important for all people from Ukraine that now a lot of institutions, a lot of people discuss this problem. And when we speak about agrarian sector, it's very important for Ukraine. And I agree with our speaker. She told about Ukraine, about our agriculture. I agree with all your ideas. And my question, it's not only my question, it's the main question now in Ukraine, what to do with our ports. Because when we speak about our export, 90% of our export we organize using our ports. I told about Black Sea. And only 10% we can organize using logistic system with Europe. So we have only one way. We need to do something with our Black Sea. We need to open our ports. And speaking about way from this problem which we have only two ways. First ways, it's military. We need to destroy the Russian ships in this region, but now it's impossible. And another way, which discuss a lot of people in the world, it's organize convoy using maybe ships from Turkey or ships from Great Britain. Is it possible? What is your idea? Using this convoy and using this logistic and organized export, because speaking about Ukraine, we will have another problem: what to do with all our crops, what to do with wheat, maize, barley, when we speak about next 3-4 months, and when we speak about Asia, and when we speak about Africa, you know, situation which they have. So when we speak about our sea, can we, or what can we do in this region? What is your idea?
Thank you very much. András has already started to address this in the chat, but maybe you want to come in here, András?
Yeah, Vitaly. Thanks. So the problem has two components. One part of the problem is the Russian Black Sea Fleet, of course. Thanks to Ukrainian anti-ship missiles, the Neptunes, and also the anti-ship missiles received from Great Britain, the Harpoons. Now the Russian Black Sea Fleet is moving relatively far away from the Ukrainian shores, meaning there will be no amphibious attack on Odessa anymore, because that would be suicide from the Russian fleet. However, even if by the fleet moving away from the Ukrainian shoreline, it could still attack any kind of cargo ship trying to enter the port of Odessa or exit from the port. So Russian Black Sea Fleet is one part of the problem. And the other part of the problem is the extensive deployment of sea mine fields. There are hundreds of sea mines deployed. And so before any kind of shipping could restart, certain demining operation is needed. Important, you don't need to demine the whole Black Sea Fleet. What one needs to demine is just a few safe passages, safe corridors through which ships could technically maneuver. And from the I don't know about the political aspects. From the technical perspective, with direct NATO involvement, particularly with the involvement of NATO countries which have shorelines on the Black Sea, meaning Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania, demining would be perfectly possible, and also escorting grain cargo ships, Panamax ships, from Odessa and back. So the technical possibility is there. Once convoys get organized, once convoys are protected by NATO ships, it's highly unlikely that the Russian Black Sea Fleet would risk an attack. But of course, there is a sequence of things. First, one needs to do the demining, and convoys can start only thereafter. And there would be still some ambiguous possibilities that the Russians could do submarine attacks, things like this. But yes, technically, convoys are indeed a possibility, but it's not a quick thing to do. So even if we start it now, what Dr. Götz has explained about the problem with the storage facilities, I'm quite afraid that this problem will kick in even before we could actually organize, we could start organizing the convoys. I hope this goes for an answer. Thank you.
Thank you for answer. And if I can, only one question, another. When we speak about opportunity of using European ports, is it real idea when we speak about price of this logistic and technical opportunity? When we speak about European country and opportunity of using their ports, what is your idea?
Thank you very much. And let's get Bettina Woodloff, also into this. She has a number of questions as well, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, Bettina Rudloff. I'm the agriculture economist at the German Institute of International Security Affairs, so SVP. My question is more now on an alternative route, which is the terrestrial route, so doing by train or truck. And we heard that there's large delay at the borders, for instance, via Poland or Romania. So there was a huge EU Commission solidarity package and mobility package on trying to facilitate the cross-border transport there. My question to maybe the economist is, how do you see that? Is there still scope to improve facilitation by, for instance, the association agreement? All the trade facilitation issues are now actually liberalized, but is there more? Could we do personal support to the customers and so forth. So I heard about 19 days of delay at the border, which is very long thinking about the short window of time. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe Dr. Götz first.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comment. Yeah, of course, it would be very much appreciated if that could be speeded up, all that process to facilitate even transport by truck. However, if you look about the size which can be transported, of course, is limited. Yeah, and if you see a vessel of Panamax, yeah, it's very difficult, or the effort is really large to make or to substitute a ship by trucks. So I'm not too, or I have difficulties to be that optimistic about it. What could be done alternatively? I think we really need to secure a lot of funds, because we have really very high market prices, and people cannot afford food at that price. So we need to make that possible. We need to give funds to those countries, to those people, so that they will be able to buy the food. Yeah. And another one, but I don't want to tap on that, is that discussion on food for fuel. Of course, I think something needs to be happen in that direction as well.
Very much, and you already alluded to or explained to us that European or EU ports are being used, even though in a small capacity. But the bottleneck still would be getting Ukrainian grains to these EU ports. You mentioned Romania and Bulgaria. There's to increase volume there is difficult. Is that right?
Yeah, that is the problem to get the grain from Ukraine to those ports. There's also efforts to increase transport by the Danube River, for example, to ports in Germany or Rotterdam. But it seems that that is really, really difficult to increase the amount exported or transported. So currently that is not really, there's not much progress.
Thank you very much. And if András doesn't want to comment on that as well, or do you?
Just one thing. Russians are aware of these efforts. That's why they are systematically downgrading the railway infrastructure south of Odessa. So there is a crucial bridge south of Odessa, the Zatoka Bridge, which is crucially important for railway transports to and from Romania. Russians are regularly attacking that bridge with missiles, trying to destroy it in order to hamper railway transportation of any kind of goods, so military shipments in, agricultural shipments out. So the Russian attacks on the railway infrastructure are constitute further hindering factors to the ones already enumerated by Dr. Götz.
Thank you very much. Now let's go to Peter Gottwald, who waited very patiently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to start by really appreciating these briefings. I think they are extremely valuable, at least for me, and I'm a regular. I have an issue regarding the grain, which relates to what Stefan Meister said a moment ago about the so-called bubble. There are many countries who are feeling that that is really not their problem. And they are, however, very much affected by the shortage of grain and fertilizer. So I wonder whether it should not be attempted to mobilize these sentiments of concern regarding the feeding of their nations in the United Nations by trying to promote in the Security Council a sort of resolution obligating the free passage of foodstuffs from ports like Odessa. Surely there are very many ways to do that. Surely one could see all the objections, but even if it were not successful, it seems to me that this could be a vehicle to engage countries who are at the moment standing apart. And as I happen to live in Switzerland, I will certainly try also to bring this idea here to people. And I could imagine that countries like Switzerland are quite, so to say, practically useful in promoting these sort of ideas. Switzerland will be in the Security Council from the 1st of January, so this is too late to start that project, but what could, of course, get things moving further earlier. And I just wanted to bring this idea because I think we are really having a big problem in having so many countries, big countries like India, but also many others as well, who are not really feeling that that is a problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Götz, do you want to respond? I mean, it's the question maybe is whether there is enough sort of international effort, or even sort of on the part of the German government to put this on a different level. You already said that there will be more money, more funding be necessary to help countries which are affected by the high prices to be able to buy on the world markets. But already, I think there was a complaint by an African president to the European Commission, which said that because of SWIFT, they won't be able to proceed payments. Do you have heard anything in that direction as well, or maybe sort of is the way the sanctions are constructed? Are they sort of do we now see that there are more trade-offs than we thought at the beginning?
Yeah, actually, I personally have heard that, for example, that Russia is continuing to export grains, and there's alternative payment systems, for example, MIR, which is used. There's a second one I know about, which people use to pay. I know, for example, with the MIR system, you cannot use that from Germany, but for example, you can use that from Kazakhstan. So if you have an account there in a bank, you can make payments from there. That sanctions make it impossible to trade wheat. You read a lot in the media, but actually I'm not informed that actually happens. What is the case is that Russia limits its exports by export restrictions. That, I mean, we observed that since 2007-8, but the usage of export restrictions has heavily intensified since the pandemic spread, and currently only very small amounts are exported. So I think that plays for sure a role.
Thank you, and maybe to András, picking up on what the question from Switzerland just sort of brought up. Is there any chance or any example in history that sort of food exports were sort of secured by international force, or is this a completely new idea? Which I mean, there have been blockages in the past as a sort of means of war, but I don't know, maybe you can shed any light on this?
I cannot recall any example just like this. I would need to think about that. I cannot say for sure that it never happened. I really need to think about that. But anyways, I mean, in the recent times, this would be something quite unusual.
Thank you. And the military situation wouldn't allow for sort of any speculation in terms of that that with, well, maybe the Russians sort of stopping where they are sort of with the war in Donbass, that they sort of declare victory, and that would create a new situation.
They will surely go until they take the whole of Luhansk and Donetsk regions. There is basically a past dependency on the Russian side, because they recognize the so-called independence of Donetsk and Luhansk republics by their full territories. by their fully claimed territories, Russia has to take the whole of Ukraine's Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast. Once they are done with that, they can afford declaring some kind of a victory, go for a ceasefire, or just decrease the intensity of hostilities. But this will not happen before the end of the summer. I mean, Luhansk region is largely taken, but significant parts of Donetsk region are still under Ukrainian control and are heavily fortified. So yes, Russia is going to maintain its effort until it takes the whole of Donetsk as well, but it will take 2-3 more months. So I expect the hostilities to decrease only by the end of the summer. Good news, by the time when they finish taking or occupying Donetsk and Luhansk region, the Russian army will be a spent force. So they will be absolutely in need of decreasing the intensity of hostilities, simply because they will be run out of soldiers, of equipment, of everything. So after the summer, it is realistic to expect a significant downscaling of the intensity of the fighting, but not before that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also have in the chat a sort of more fundamental question, whether this is quite poses a question about sort of the sense of sanctions, or whether there is a sort of as Stefan Meister also said, that sort of this maximalist approach is being challenged now, and maybe is reversed sort of to sort of have more calibrated sanctions. Do you think, Dr. Götz, that this is something we will also seeing in questions related to food security? Do you think that the sanctions which are in place now will stay as they are?
Oh yeah, this is a very difficult question. Actually, I think that Russia really, or that again, the USDA forecasts that Russia will become again the largest wheat exporter with 39 million tons, some even say 41 million tons of wheat exports. This means some power. And well, I'm an agricultural economist and not a military expert, but it can be used. And I personally expect chance is very high it will be used, because if 39 million tons of wheat will not be put on the market, okay, if they restrict, for example, for a couple of weeks, yeah, because I think then they might be able to achieve some aims. So for negotiation, I think it's a powerful tool. And okay, in the end, it will depend on how large is the harvest of the other large grain exporters. Expectations, for example, regarding India were very high. Now they are not zero, but they are limited. Then it will depend on France, on Germany, on US. So you cannot say for sure, but it's a power they have. And I would be surprised if they would not use it.
Many thanks. We have 4 minutes left, and one question by Boris Ginsburg, please.
Hello. Yeah, it's not a question, but I think that I could maybe add something to the question about the sense of sanctions, because I'm researching this in my dissertation. I'm looking at the side effects of sanctions, and about the sense. The literature is saying that most of the times the sanction mostly have a symbolic effect, and Another reason why especially democratic states use sanctions so often is because there are certain benefits for domestic politics, in particular a rise or increase of in the polls for the politicians who impose the sanctions. So most of the times, yes, sanctions are not effective. Some even say that only 5% of sanctions are effective. But nevertheless, what I would like to add is that when we speak about the effectiveness of sanctions, we should be very, very careful that we don't get in the trap of binary thinking, because when we think of sanctions, we always distinguish between effective and ineffective. But actually, this is my personal opinion, and this is also the opinion that I'm writing in my dissertation, is that sanctions are effective and ineffective at the same time. They do not reach their main goal, but nevertheless, they create certain, let's say, headaches for the target, but also, of course, for the sender. But nevertheless, this is the best option if you want to punish an autocratic state without intervening militarily. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe Bettina Rudloff once more, who's very, very busy contributing questions in the chat. Maybe you want to come in again.
No, sorry. I just use it as a kind of parallel universe for chatting on question. I just wanted to add that there's usually the general principle not to use agriculture-specific sanctions. There's no general UN binding resolution on that, but usually countries follow that. There are some exceptions on more indirectly affecting agriculture areas, which is on fertilizer, which are recently in place, not against Russia, but against Belarus, for instance. So, but maybe the issue of unintended effects, specifically on humanitarian relevant products, could be considered more actually somehow to increase immediately food aid if you observe unintended effects. Things like that could be maybe developed more. That would be a proposal I had.
Thank you very much. We are sort of running out of time. If there are not any more questions, and I can't see any right now, I think I would close the meeting this morning. Thank you all for attending again. We continue this series. Please watch out for the next invite. Please join me in thanking our three speakers, Stefan Meister, who has already left, Dr. Linde Götz, and Dr. András Rácz. Thank you for your questions, comments, and making this a lively morning. Thank you all for coming, and I wish you a very good morning.